Hello and welcome to Spokane County Spotlight. I'm Commissioner Al French, and my guests today are Superior Court Judge Maryann Moreno and Jackie Van Wormer, the Spokane Regional Criminal Justice Administrator. Welcome to Spokane County Spotlight.
Thank you. Thanks.
Public safety is the #1 priority for government, and we spend 70% of our annual budget dedicated to the law enforcement and criminal justice system. It covers everything from deputies who patrol the streets to the courts and our jail system. It's a staggering amount of money, close to $120 million each year, and those costs keep growing. Today's Spotlight is about how Spokane County and our neighboring jurisdictions are working together to address the need of a more efficient and effective criminal justice system. To make sure we don't miss any details, my guests, Jackie Van Wormer and Judge Moreno, are extremely familiar with the local efforts to develop reforms that will result in a better outcome for our community. There's actually quite a bit of history behind this work. So Dr. Van Wormer and Judge Moreno, can you share with us some of that work and how it's happened over the past 5 years for our viewers?
Thanks, Commissioner. We have 2 correctional facilities here in Spokane, the downtown jail and the Geiger Correctional Facility out in Medical Lake. If you recall, back in 2008, there was talk of closing the Geiger facility. That facility holds about 200 to 300 people. We had a crisis on our hands at the time. So we had some really strong leadership then. The county commissioners, Sheriff Knezevich, some other individuals who hired a consultant to come in and take a look at this. After meeting with him, we decided that we just didn't want to build bricks and mortar. We wanted to take a look at our whole criminal justice system, perhaps deal with some of the inefficiencies. The first thing we needed to do was to collect the data. And then?
So in 2012, based on a lot of that data review, the county commissioners and the mayor's office signed a memorandum of understanding around creating greater efficiencies in our local criminal justice system. Again, because it is 70% of the county, almost 70% of the county budget, about 50% of the city of Spokane budget. And this MOU created it was called the Criminal Justice Commission. It was an independent panel of 3 individuals, retired Judge Murphy, Phil Wetzel, and Jim McDivitt. And they conducted over 300 hours of independent assessment and meetings with the community, with various criminal justice agencies and departments. And in the end, they developed what's called the Blueprint for Reform. And it was published December of 2013, and the blueprint has 43 recommendations for reform based on not only the data that was collected and analyzed from 2008 on, but also after that extensive interview process and also hearing from the community.
So after all of the meetings and the research that was conducted, what did the final report contain?
So it had the 43 recommendations, but I think one of the most critical pieces of the Blueprint for Reform was that it reestablished our Spokane Regional Law and Justice Council. All counties in Washington state are required to have an operational law and justice council, a coordinating council, if you will, with various elected officials that are involved in the criminal justice system. For example, the sheriff and your probation, Department of Corrections, a prosecutor, basically elected officials, but also the county commissioners have the ability to appoint others onto that coordinating council or law and justice council as well. So one of the first orders of business for us was to get that law and justice council up and operating so we could have a foundation, a structure for the reforms. And that Law and Justice Council currently has 22 members on it, very large board. They meet the second Wednesday of every month at 12 o'clock in the public health building on the first floor. And we've been able to have some really quite robust discussions in that group. We have, of course, judges present, public defenders, prosecutors, law enforcement, our risk manager, juvenile probation, PreTrial services, and the community is invited, of course, to be part of that process as well. Those are open public meetings. I think, though, that we have the Law and Justice Council, but really kind of the workhorse of the process to carry out those 43 recommendations was the creation of subcommittees. And we have 7 different subcommittees that are up and operating around those 43 recommendations. And those groups meet, and we have about 10 to 12 individuals on each of those subcommittees. And those range everywhere from a facilities subcommittee, where we're looking at our facility needs around jails and courtrooms, for example, all the way to performance measurements. So how do we collect data that's valuable, that where we're not just widget counting, we're actually measuring change within our system and with the defendants and the offenders that we work with, and then all the way to strategic planning. And so these groups meet at least monthly, generally. And then as they make recommendations, those recommendations are pushed up to the Law and Justice Council for a vote.
So you've done a really good job of describing some of the members that are part of this council, but talk a little bit about what's the real mission of this Law and Justice Council? What's the big picture look that we're trying to accomplish here?
So really what we're looking at is to create greater efficiencies and a more effective system. So Spokane is not unique. There's criminal justice reform happening across the state, across the country. And this reform is driven really in response to in the 1980s and 90s, where we had a sort of a get tough response to our criminal justice system. We built lots of prisons, we built jails, and we started to move away from kind of looking at the underlying causes of crime. And so what this reform is allowing us to do is to take a step back and say, do we want to be so focused on the offense, or should we be also focusing on the offender themselves and what drives the crime underneath? Because most people, Commissioner, don't wake up at 45 years of age and say, I'm going to go out and burglarize a home. There's conditions, there are issues driving the crime in our community, and much of it is drug-related, mental health, poverty. We have various different factors that are driving crime within our community. So how do we as a system take a step back and think more about risk to the community and then about offender change? So that and actually that model we know has worked across the country, and it creates safer communities.
So, Judge, what does this mean for you in your courtroom? I mean, how do you view the role of the courts in this process?
Well, I think it's really important for the courts to recognize that we can't keep doing business as usual. Our jail is totally overcrowded, and we're in a crisis situation every single day. What we're looking to do and to develop are strategies for determining who are the right people who should be in the county jail. We have some slides I think we're going to get to that will show, that might show, that we've looked at anyway, that indicate that we've got middle to low level offenders in the county jail. Certainly there are individuals who need to be locked up. I don't want there to be any dispute about that. There are individuals who are dangerous and they are a risk to the community. But we're not really talking about those. What we're trying to figure out how to do is to more effectively manage our jail population, recognizing what people need, and trying to figure out, with the use of a risk tool, what sort of a risk these individuals do pose. Can they be safely released? And under what conditions can we release them?
Right. So I know that the Board of County Commissioners have assumed the oversight of the jail and the correctional center. We've been increasingly concerned about the makeup of our jail population, and you're starting to talk a little bit about making sure that we have the right people incarcerated and those that don't necessarily need to be behind bars out in the community and stuff. Do you want to talk a little bit more about how we're going about this process?
Sure. So I can talk about some of the data, and then maybe the judge can talk also about like what pretrial looks like. So as the slide showed, what that slide was a snapshot of data from 2014 of who's in our local jail. That was jail population by legal status. So on that day, 50% of the jail population, and we average about 965 individuals incarcerated in our two systems, our
Right.
Geiger and the downtown jail at any one time. 50% are pretrial. So again, these are individuals that are pending their case. There's a presumption of innocence, which of course the judge can speak to. But you know, when we look at our population, it ranges anywhere from about 50%, sometimes on some days upwards of 85% of the individuals in our local jail are considered pretrial. And when we look nationally, the national average is about 62%. What we've seen in other communities is that they've been able to use what we call a risk responsivity, a risk needs responsivity tool. The risk tool removes a lot of the judgment out of the pretrial bail process and bond release process, and basically it's an actuarial assessment, and we were able to look at the defendant and say, is this individual a risk to reoffend, and are they a risk for failure to appear for future court hearings? And if they're not, then can they be safely supervised in the community on pretrial while they're pending their cases, so that we can have the beds available in our local jails for those individuals that are going to need them. Like Judge Moreno was referencing, there are some individuals that are what we consider very high risk and high need, and we need to be able to hold them when they're arrested. So we want to make sure we have the right population in jail. And what communities across the country have been able to do is successfully drive down that pretrial population successfully without having any impact on public safety whatsoever. And in fact, they've been able to increase court appearance rates while these individuals are pending their cases.
So, Judge, can you talk to us a little bit about exactly what is a pretrial supervision, and what does that supervision look like?
Sure. Well, the Constitution gives individuals rights, and one of those rights is to be presumed innocent. So just to put this, the data in perspective, on any given day, Spokane County holds 50% of people who are innocent. Okay, so if that gives you a little bit of perspective on it.
Yeah.
These are individuals who are presumed innocent, and the presumption is release. And so when an individual appears in front of the court is required to release them unless two factors are met. The person is a flight risk, meaning it's likely that they're not going to appear for court, or secondly, they're a danger to the community. Those determinations are difficult, and that's when Jackie talks about, or Dr. Van Wormer talks about the risk tool, it's giving the courts another tool in their toolkit to be able to determine who to release, who could be safely released into the community, and who is likely to appear for court. I will say that Spokane County, state of Washington, has some of the highest property crime rates in the country, and I think that that's general knowledge. What we see with these property crimes is that these are considered lower level offenders, but they're generally not people who, as Dr. Van Wormer indicates, woke up one day at 45 and decided to commit a crime. Generally speaking, these are people who suffer from mental health issues, who suffer from drug addiction issues, and generally speaking, are poor. They're living in poverty. We've been using cash bonds, requiring people to post them to get out of jail. So in addition to the fact that 50% of the people in the jail are pre-trial or innocent, they're generally the lower socioeconomic individuals in our community.
So I think a lot of folks, when we look at, the reform system and stuff, I mean, there's kind of this underlying feeling that, well, don't we want to be sure that we hold offenders accountable for their crimes? And so that's the role of this review and the risk assessment and stuff. You want to talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely, and I think that as our Law and Justice Council operates, I think that's one of our main mission. It's within our mission statement, right, that we are holding these defendants accountable. But it is much easier for an offender to serve some time out in jail than it is for them to be under heavy supervision in the community, engaged in drug and alcohol treatment, engaged in parenting classes, attending their needed mental health services and taking medications. That's hard work. And so we know that jail the use of jail is the least effective way to change behavior. And that's really kind of what we want to get to, because if we don't change the underlying behaviors, then we're going to just continue to see this cycle happening over and over and over again. Because of that, and what we've seen across the country, the MacArthur Foundation, which is a very large private foundation. If you, of course, KSPS is a recipient, I know, of the John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation support. They have invested now $75 million in jail reform. And they basically put out a request for proposal. They had almost 200 applicants. And out of the 200 applicants, Spokane County was one of the 20 sites chosen by the MacArthur Foundation to work in. And the goal of the Safety and Justice Challenge, there's two words in there: safety, right? So public safety,
Right.
and then challenge. But the challenge is to drive down your jail population safely, drive down the length of stay, how long these individuals are sitting in jail pending their cases, and then addressing racial and ethnic disparities within our criminal justice system. Because we know that racial and ethnic disparities exist across the country, and Spokane, of course, is not immune to that. So we felt very blessed, very honored to have been selected by the MacArthur Foundation to be part of the Safety and Justice Challenge. So we've been knee-deep in that work for the past 6 months, and we just now submitted what's called a Phase 2 grant. So we built a very strong work group around the grant, and we put together a very large proposal, and we're requesting $3.2 million to carry out further reforms.
So what you're saying is that along with criminal justice reform, we should also be addressing the social causes for crime. And so that's part of all of this effort, is to address that side of the equation as well.
Absolutely. I think that it's often, we think of the criminal justice system, we tend to forget that the people that were within the criminal justice system, again, they have various needs, right? Our local jail, for example, 85% of the defendants, of the inmates in our local jails, have some sort of mental health need. They're in need of counseling, they're in need of diagnoses, they're in need of medications, they need case managers, for example. That's a very high proportion of individuals that are in our jail with mental health needs. And so really, the community needs to come to understand about the importance that this is a public health problem. It's not just a law enforcement problem, or it's not just a courts problem. It's a public health problem.
Well, and to recognize some of these different constituency bases out there that we need to be addressing. And the courts have taken a leadership role in establishing a number of different types of courts. You know, you've got the drug court, you've got the veterans court, you've got
Mental health courts.
Mental health court.
Yes.
You want to talk a little bit about those and the role that they play in trying to find justice?
Sure, it's a different kind of court. If you're charged with a crime and you go into court, you've got your lawyer, you've got the prosecutor, and they're not, they're at odds. The prosecutor has a different goal for the most part. These alternative courts have a different type of a mindset to them. It's more of a holistic type of an approach. So with our drug court, what happens at the end of a successful drug court practice is that a person's charge is dismissed. But along the way, that person receives mental health treatment, that person receives drug treatment if they need it, they receive bus passes, they receive housing, and they are watched like hawks in terms of their behavior. Some people are revoked, they don't successfully complete drug court, but at the very end, generally speaking, we have been able to, I think our data would show that we've been able to reduce recidivism, the likelihood of them coming back and committing more crimes pretty significantly. So it's a different, sort of a more gentler type of approach to dealing with an individual.
Well, and at some point, this individual is going to be released back into the community, and so it's a matter of what do you want to be releasing into the community. And I know that a couple times when I was visiting out at Geiger Correctional Facility, there's training that we provide for the inmates, and it's amazing to me that some of the inmates have had kind of no moral training, you know, what is right and wrong, no educational background so that they can qualify to get a job. And so if you can't get a job and you can't make money to be able to live on, then you resort to crime and stuff. So how do we make sure that what we put back in the community is a contributor to the community and not a distractor and stuff? So that's all part of the work that we're all actively engaged in here. So, and of course, poverty also contributes to the property crime, as you mentioned earlier, Judge, throughout the region. So how much progress have we made since the Spokane Regional Law and Justice Council was established? Can you give us a little bit of background as to what we've done and where we're at?
Sure. So like I mentioned, about the first year was really spent creating the structure and the foundation with the subcommittee work. And the subcommittee spent quite a bit of time just getting educated about the topics. And that was very important so that everybody came from the same foundation, everyone came from the same level of information and research. I think probably one of our biggest wins to date, so to speak, is that we are in the process right now of building a local customized risk needs responsivity tool. We're doing that in conjunction with Dr. Zach Hamilton at Washington State University. We're very fortunate that he happens to live here. He's one of the leaders in the country on customization of risk needs tools. He actually built the Washington State Department of Corrections tool as well. And so we're in the process of getting that tool up and running. We hope to have that in place at that point of pretrial, so it can be used to help make pretrial decisions here in the next 6 months. And then we'll be moving quickly into using the tool in the jail. So when individuals come in for booking or they come in for classification in the jail, we'll be able to use the tool there as well, and then quickly move to that point of using it at probation as well, because the tool can drive probation in terms of what levels of supervision do these individuals need in the community and what types of services. Again, like you were saying, do we need to offer them, for example, the evidence-based practice moral recognition therapy, where they get to work on their thinking skills and turn those criminal thinking skills around, right? Then once they can address that, that can lead to jobs and job applications, and so making sure that we're hooking these clients, these inmates up to the right services is really quite critical for us. But that, I think, is one of our big successes, and of course getting to participate in the Safety and Justice Challenge. We also, the Board of County Commissioners, there's a large effort across the country to address mental health issues within our jails. National Association of County Officials, NACO, put out a Stepping Up initiative, it's called, and they've called on counties to enter into resolutions which state that they will comprehensively address the mental health challenges within our local jails. And so, as you're well aware, our county commissioners quickly, we were one of the first counties that signed a resolution in Washington State, quickly signed that resolution, so we're taking a pretty comprehensive approach at addressing mental health within our jail facilities, and we were just awarded a significant grant from DSHS in which to do that.
So as we talk about putting these individuals back in the community, it's not only giving them the tools to be able to survive in the community, but we also need to be making sure that we keep families together. And in fact, I think there was a Benton County ACL lawsuit, or maybe you can talk a little bit about that and how that impacts some of the stuff that we do, or?
Well, there's a large effort across the country to address legal financial obligations that are ordered of defendants. And the judge can certainly speak to this probably a little bit better than I can. But some counties are currently under court order, or they've been sued by various entities because they're basically, what happens is that individuals will come into court and they'll be ordered to pay fines and fees. And when you're an individual who's has a drug addiction, for example, or living in poverty, and you're ordered these fines and fees, and they instantly go to a collection agency with a very high rate of interest, it creates almost what we call a debtor's prison.
Right.
And so because we've built very large local jails in some communities, there's plenty of bed space available in some communities. We kind of have the opposite happening in Spokane with such a crowded jail. But in some communities, they've built large jails so that they can rent out jail beds. And so what happens is that they end up then holding people on legal financial obligations.
So we're getting close to the end of the show here and stuff. I want to just touch very briefly on the MacArthur Grant and next steps there, and then how can the public get involved in this process? So, Judge.
Our next step is we're waiting to hear if we get the grant. We're very optimistic. As Jackie said, we're one of 20 sites, and they're going to cut that in half. And we're hoping, we got our fingers crossed. I mean, I think we have a great chance to get the grant. I think that what's impressed the other jurisdictions and the MacArthur Grant folks is that we have such in-depth community collaboration and involvement. We've actively invited the community, and the community has been ready, and we're just ready for this and chomping at the bit for this. So that's great. My understanding, though, is that even if we don't receive the grant, we're still going to receive some benefits from MacArthur, and maybe Jackie can address the specifics of that, but they're just not going to leave us high and dry.
Right.
We're still going to have some technical assistance, some support. We'll still be part of the Safety and Justice Challenge of the 20 sites, but 10 sites receive, the intensive investment.
Right.
So, of course, we're hoping that we're part of that investment, but if not, we're still going to carry out these reforms.
Right.
We have a great amount of commitment from elected officials all the way down to the community, and it's time.
Yeah, so how can the community get involved?
Well, we have a website, srljc.org. We have all of our calendars are there. Again, all of our meetings are open. They're welcome to just email me even through the county website. I feel like we're very responsive to the community. It's a really critical component for us because the system does, in a sense, belong to the community, the criminal justice system.
Well, and I think one of the things that I shared with the folks that came to our interview, I think from Vera, was that an investment in Spokane can get you a lot more reward than an investment like in Los Angeles, for instance, or some of these other bigger communities. Being a smaller community, $1 can get you a whole lot more benefit here than it will in some of the other bigger communities.
Absolutely.
So as we start to wrap up, is there anything else that you would like to add?
No, other than the fact that I'm pretty excited. We started this discussion back in 2008, and that was the first time that all of the players were at the table. And so the fact that this is continuing and is really ramped up is extremely exciting.
Yeah. So we are going to be doing some more shows about this as we continue our progress through this journey to try and make sure that we can get a cost-effective and efficient criminal justice system, that's the entire system, and make sure that we can continue to work to get our community, keep them safe. And I just want to thank both of you ladies for the outstanding work that you're doing, the leadership role that you're playing in this process. The community owes you a great deal of gratitude for your thoughtfulness and your leadership roles, and so thank you very much.
Thank you.
So I'm Al French, and I'm afraid that we are out of time, so I'd like to thank both Superior Court Judge Moreno and Jackie Van Warmer for joining me this morning. And again, thank you for joining us on Spokane County Spotlight.